But first, I would like to start by saying good afternoon, everyone. It is so wonderful to see you all here on this very cold and windy afternoon. My name is Rajan Rankins, and I will be your Masters of Ceremony this afternoon. I am a senior at School Without Walls, and I have been a proud member of the Southeast Tennessee Learning Center for 13 years under the guidance and direction of the esteemed Cora Masters Berry. It is my honor to welcome you to the Council of the District of Columbia's Black History Month program. First and foremost, I'd like to recognize our mayor, Ms. Muriel Bowser, Councilman Chairman Phil Mendelson, and our council members for being here today. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to our guest of honor, Ms. Rita Thompson, who will be speaking later on in the program. While we're excited to have you all here this afternoon, we'd especially like to say welcome to the students from Kip College-Prep Choir, Ludlow Taylor Elementary, and Blacks and Wax, all who will be presenting this afternoon. This year's theme is African Americans and the Vote. Please join me in thanking Andre Strickland with Councilmember Robert White's office for their work in putting this program together. I also want to give a hearty thanks to Bruce Darconte with the Capital Community Partners and Aqua 301 for their sponsorships. We have a great program in store, so let's get started. I'd like to invite Chairman Mendelson to the podium.
Good afternoon to everyone. I want to acknowledge that the mayor has joined us, Mayor Muriel Bowser. Thank you for being here. And I see actually next to her former First Lady Cora Masters Berry. Welcome. And two colleagues, Vincent Gray and Robert White. And I want to thank Robert White because his office has taken the lead in putting this event together today. I think you did that as well last year. And sometimes it's good to share the workload among council members. So I thank you for that. I have some remarks, but I was asked first to present this resolution or to state that the council adopted a resolution that is, to look at the end of it, that this resolution may be cited as the Black History Month Recognition Resolution of 2020, and the Council of the District of Columbia recognizes the exceptional contributions of African Americans to the United States and the District of Columbia and honors those who have shaped district history. And the resolution begins, and I'm not going to read all of this, but it is that Black History Month was first proposed by Black educators and the Black United Students at Kent State University in February 1969. This tradition was transformed into a nationally recognized event by President Gerald Ford during the United States bicentennial celebration of 1976. And at that time, President Gerald Ford said that the nation should, quote, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. And then, of course, Washington has a rich history with regard to African American history and culture, and has been often at the epicenter of fights such as for abolition, civil rights, and race equity. What do I do with this resolution? Do I present it to you, council member? Well, we did this resolution. Anybody who wants a photo op, here's the resolution. So I have some additional remarks I wanted to give. There's a famous saying, which actually has been said in many different ways and by many different people, but it is a famous saying nonetheless, that those who do not pay attention to the mistakes of history are doomed to repeat them. That speaks to the value of history and Black history. When I was growing up, there was no Black History Month, and my studies of American history said very little about African Americans in American history, except that they were slaves, less than a whole person in the Constitution, and that segregation was declared illegal after Brown versus Board of Education. But we know that one value of history is that we learn about role models and people we can aspire to. That Black people were marginalized throughout history and still struggle for equality, but in fact have been present throughout. A black man was present and murdered at the Boston Massacre. A black man played a major role in the laying out of the monumental city of the nation's new capital. Black men fought with distinction during the Civil War. Many black women were active suffragettes demanding that women have the right to vote. A black man invented the traffic light. In fact, there have been many black inventors. The list of distinguished African Americans is long and varied. And knowing something about black history gives us something to be proud about as Washingtonians. We celebrate that Frederick Douglass had deep ties to our city. He was United States Marshal for the District of Columbia during the late 1870s, and then Recorder of Deeds in the 1880s. In fact, Frederick Douglass remarked that because deeds were copied by hand and customers were charged by the word, that as Recorder of Deeds, Frederick Douglass was the most highly compensated federal official after the President of the United States. Another famous Washingtonian is Charles Hamilton Houston, a graduate of Dunbar High School when it was known as M Street High School, who played the critical role in the legal strategy that led to Brown versus Board of Education and the dismantling of Jim Crow. Knowing these and many more examples of Washingtonians who were national leaders gives our youth role models to aspire to, and that is an important role of history. The district was affected by the civil rights movement in many ways. So many of our home rule founding fathers were from SNCC and other civil rights era organizations, Marion Barry, John Wilson, Dave Clark, Frank Smith, and more. As you know, the civil rights movement was about killing Jim Crow, achieving equality, and enjoying the full measure of citizenship, including the vote. But here we are today, struggling against forces that haven't gone away. The civil rights movement may have climaxed with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but today, in many states, mostly across the South, we have seen how the ability to vote has been made difficult. Understanding our history of race relations in this country helps us to understand what is happening now. Black History Month is not just learning about people who died years ago. Rather, it teaches us how African Americans can force change, how there is value in activism and political participation, activism that can throw out voter ID laws and change policy, and close the gaps, the education gap, the income gap, the wealth gap, gaps that have resulted from our history of racism and intolerance. History, real history, teaches us. It teaches us how to be better. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you, Phil, council members, for inviting everybody down to City Hall to celebrate Black History Month. It is indeed fitting that we are in this great hall of representation for the people of the District of Columbia. Every month is Black History Month, but it's always good to point a spotlight on the accomplishments of extraordinary Americans who have contributed to every sector of American life. And I want to acknowledge you again, Phil, for the remarks you made talking about the Black experience from slavery through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights era, to having a Black president. And it seems like we may have to start that cycle all the way over again. But all of us are very focused on making sure we are not losing ground in any way in our city or in any way in our country. And so we have a job to do this season of 2020 to make sure that doesn't happen. We also have an immediate job to do. Because in our city, we are, in a very real way, still not free. 700,000 people here pay taxes but do not have a vote in Congress. We have spent many, many years and decades fighting for that right. And this Tuesday, We will go to the Congress. Our Congresswoman has secured a markup of the 51st Statehood bill at Congress this Tuesday. So during this Black History Month, our very own Congresswoman has been a part of that civil rights legacy, the fight for D.C. statehood. And this Tuesday, I believe that she's going to deliver us, or this week coming, a vote in committee on statehood. And Congressman Steny Hoyer, the leader from Maryland, has committed to a vote on statehood before the summer. So we have indeed come a long way. We had the experience of going together, unified as a government, just a few months back on a statehood hearing. And we made clear why the old arguments against statehood simply don't work, and only revealed the partisan nature of the attacks against us. They used circular logic. They argued for parking over the vote. They demonstrated that they were perfectly happy with an undemocratic Congress if it meant that we, in our liberal and brown selves, didn't get 2 senators. And we made it clear that we will call them out for their hypocrisy. So on Tuesday, for the first time in over 25 years, the House will vote on statehood for Washington, D.C. in the Committee on Oversight and Reform. I invite every Washingtonian who cares about justice and fairness to be there, to tune in, and to demand that D.C. becomes the 51st state. And I dare say that will be Black history. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Chairman Middleton, for your remarks. Now, we will experience a program that has really shaped me to be the young man I am today. Over the years, this program has developed into something very beautiful. And I would like to introduce my brothers and sisters at the Southeast Tennessee Learning Center for Blacks and Wax.
As a youngster, I loved hearing the sermons of Dr. King. They were my inspiration and encouraged me to act on changes I wanted to see. In 1957, I helped organize sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. I was a wrestler during these demonstrations, which upset my mother, who always said, "Don't get in trouble, don't get in the way." Well, I got in trouble and I got in the way, but it was necessary trouble. In 1961, I was one of the freedom riders from traveling segregation at bus terminals in the South. It was dangerous work that resulted in arrests and beatings for me and many others in the movement. But I fought on and became chairman of SNCC, and then part of the Big Six leaders organizing the March on Washington with Dr. King. After the march in 1964, the Civil Rights Act became law, but the injustices continued. To bring attention to the struggle, I, along with Hosea Williams, led a march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama on Sunday, March 7, 1965. On that day, we were attacked by state troopers. It was brutal. This time, we were severely beaten and suffered a fractured. I was severely beaten and suffered a fractured skull. The attack on us marchers was so bad that this day became known as Bloody Sunday. I was so devastated by Dr. King's assassination and the assassination of Robert Kennedy, but I had to press on, and my work led me to the United States Congress, where I have represented Georgia's 5th District since 1986. The vote is the most powerful, must not allow the power of the vote to be neutralized. We must never go back. I'm Congressman John Lewis.
Women like me aren't supposed to run for office. I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family. Mother from Puerto Rico, dad from the South Bronx. I was born in a place where your zip code determines your destiny. My name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And in January of 2019, I was sworn in as the youngest woman in American history to serve in the United States Congress. At 30 years old, I am representing New York's 14th Congressional District. I'm an educator, an organizer, a working class New Yorker. I've worked with expectant mothers, I've waited tables, and led classrooms. Going into politics wasn't in the plan, but every day it gets harder for working families like mine to get by. The rent gets higher, healthcare covers less, and our income stays the same. That's why it is important that all of us get up, go out, and vote. Vote so we can have affordable rent and state-of-the-art healthcare. That's why I run for Congress. What we need in this country is Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, a federal jobs guarantee, criminal justice reform, and my Green New Deal. We can do it now. It doesn't take 100 years for us to do this. It takes political courage and your vote. I am fighting for working families, and 100% of my attention is on the affairs related to those families. Estoy luchando por familias trabajadoras y 100% de mi atención es sobre los asuntos de estas familias. ¡Sí se puede! ¡Sí se puede!
That was just great, you know. Normally I'm participating, so you know it's amazing to be on the outside looking in. It's inspiring to really see our young people emulate these powerful figures that have made significant contributions to our communities and our country and our culture. So let's give another round of applause to the wonderful Black Chorale. Now, Rita Jacobs Thompson is a former assistant professor of Civil War era studies and Africana studies at Gettysburg College. Currently, she is an independent scholar and consultant in Washington, D.C. Thompson teaches a course titled The History of Policing in Black Communities to all employees of the Metropolitan Police and Metro Transit Police Department. She also organizes and co-produces the annual Benjamin Drummond Emancipation Day celebration, which recognizes the end of slavery in the nation's capital. Her academic research focuses on the American Civil War and Reconstruction era in Maryland and the District of Columbia. We are so thrilled to have her here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Ms. Rita Jacobs Thompson.
Good afternoon. How am I supposed to go after all of that? Wow. So good afternoon. I am honored to be here today with you to celebrate Black History Month, and I thank the members of the City Council for the invitation. Dr. Carter G Woodson, the son of a former slave and the second African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University, founded the Association for the Study of African American Life and History in 1915. A year later, he established the Journal of Negro History, which is today the Journal of African American History, and in 1937, he founded the Negro History Bulletin. In 1926, Woodson initiated Negro History Week, and in 1976, the celebration expanded into a month. The organization establishes a theme every year to recognize, celebrate, and to disseminate information regarding an important aspect of Black life, history, and culture to a global community. This year's theme, as you've heard, is African Americans and the Vote. Throughout the year, we will reflect on two watershed periods in American history: the passage of the 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, which opened up the franchise to Black men, and the passage of the 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, which opened up the opportunity for women to vote. Now, while we celebrate these milestones and recognize the strides that have been made to extend citizenship rights to all Americans, we must also recognize the limitations and the setbacks encountered along the way. To understand these strides, limitations, and setbacks, we can start with the post-Revolutionary War period and the formation of the United States of America. As northern states moved to end slavery through immediate and gradual measures, some also extended the franchise to Black men. States like Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts allowed Black men to vote and did not pass laws that disenfranchised them. However, New Jersey took away the vote from Black men in 1807. In 1818, Connecticut decided that Black men who had not voted in the state's previous election should no longer have voting rights. 3 years later, New York expanded the white male electorate by removing property requirements placed upon them while maintaining those same requirements for Black men. In 1838, Pennsylvania completely stripped the Black man of his right to vote. Throughout the antebellum period and leading up to the Civil War, voting rights for Black men residing in free states was, in a few cases, possible, in some cases, non-existent, in other cases, limited, and overall, fragile. Before Lee surrendered at Appomattox, Black voting rights were being considered. Writing to General James A. Wadsworth in January of 1864, Lincoln explained, and I quote, "How to better the conditions of the colored race has long been a study which has attracted my serious and careful attention. Hence, I think I am clear and decided as to what course I shall pursue in the premises, regarding it a religious duty, as the nation's guardian of these people who have so heroically vindicated their manhood on the battlefield, where in assisting to save the Republic, they have demonstrated in blood their right to the ballot, which is by the humane protection of the flag they have so fearlessly defended, end quote. Hence, Lincoln was prepared to extend the right to vote to black men who fought for the Union during the Civil War, but he would never get that opportunity. During the period of Reconstruction, African American men would make great strides. Under congressional Reconstruction, those in the former Confederacy entered into politics as they were elected as delegates to state constitutional conventions. For instance, on January 14th of 1868, delegates gathered in a large 3-story brick mansion on the west side of Meeting Street in Charleston, South Carolina, to rewrite that state's constitution. Among them were 76 black men, many of whom had just been emancipated a few years later from slavery. In 1867, our next-door neighbor, Maryland, held his own state constitutional convention. 3 years earlier, African Americans were freed through state action, but in 1867, those freedmen were not invited to serve as delegates to help rewrite their state's constitution. This illustrated the necessity for a constitutional amendment that removed race, color, or previous condition of servitude as an impediment to voting and forced those border and northern states to extend the franchise to black men. On March 31st of 1870, Thomas Peterson became the first African American to cast a ballot in a United States election after the amendment's passage. This Perth Amboy, New Jersey resident played a role in determining if their town charter would be revised or abandoned in favor of a township form of government. During the next 7 years, African Americans would participate in the political process. Did you notice I said African Americans? Why? Because black women were very much a part of the process. They attended political meetings, engaged their men in conversations and sometimes debates about candidates and issues. And black women even chastised black men when some of them tried to retreat from the voting polls due to the violence and intimidations used by those who attempted to silence their political voices. In other words, voting was often a family affair. Black women celebrated the passage of the 15th Amendment, but a number of them still pushed to extend the franchise to women. 2 years after the passage and ratification of the 15th Amendment, Sojourner Truth, along with other suffragists across the country, tried to vote and were turned away. Before she died, Truth warned, quote, "Now, if you want me to get out the world, you better get the women voting soon. I shan't go till I can do that," end quote. In 1874, Mary Ann Shadd Cary, a graduate of Howard University Law School, addressed the House Judiciary Committee to petition for the right to vote for women right here in Washington, D.C. She explained, quote, "I am not vain enough to suppose for a moment that words of mine could make one iota of weight to the argument from these learned and earnest women." She then went on to detail how, as a colored woman, yet as a resident of this district, a taxpayer, she was allotted only a portion of the rights of her male counterparts. Unfortunately, neither of these women would benefit from the fruits of their labor, as the passage of the 19th Amendment would come decades after their death. Now, in spite of those state constitutional conventions and the passage of the 15th Amendment, a number of black men were prevented from voting through legal and extra-legal measures. By 1900, a pamphlet was distributed titled, "To the Colored Men of Voting Age in the Southern States, What a Colored Man Should Do to Vote." The pamphlet broke down the restrictions state by state. For example, in Alabama, Louisiana, and South Carolina, quote, "If you cannot read and write, you can register if you own $300 worth of property," end quote. In Arkansas and Georgia, quote, "You must pay your poll tax," end quote. This warning was in all capital letters. One former slave in Georgia lamented, and I'm quoting him, "Do you know I've never voted in my life? Never been able to exercise my right to vote as a citizen because of the poll tax. I can't pay a poll tax, can't have a voice in my own government," end quote. Poll taxes, literacy tests, the understanding clause, and the grandfather clause played a significant role in diminishing the black vote. White supremacist hate groups like the KKK attempted to diminish the rest. Through sheer violence and intimidation, they discouraged black voters from showing up at the polls and running for office. By the turn of the century, George White from the great state of North Carolina, and you must say great state of North Carolina when your mother is from North Carolina, right, was the lone black man serving in the United States Congress. He would serve until 1901. Before leaving that body, White expressed his frustrations over the disenfranchisement of black voters in his state. And he did so unapologetically, stating, quote, "The only apology that I have to make for the earnestness with which I have spoken is that I am pleading for the life, the liberty, the future happiness, and the manhood suffrage for 1/8 of the entire population of the United States," end quote. It would be 28 years before another African American would serve in that body again. Oscar Stanton DePriest would serve the state of Illinois from 1929 to 1935. It would be 68 years before the first black woman, Shirley Chisholm of New York, would be elected to Congress. The efforts to deny African Americans the franchise would continue unabated, but so did the efforts of individuals and organizations to renew voting rights for black men and to expand the right to vote to other citizens. These efforts culminated with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This important piece of legislation significantly changed the relationship between the federal government and the state governments. And it was the most significant law put in place to protect African American voting rights since Reconstruction. The law made an immediate impact. By the end of the year, 250,000 new black voters were registered. And by the end of 1966, only 4 southern states had less than 50% of African Americans registered to vote. African Americans and their white allies sacrificed a great deal to shine a light on the nation's hypocrisy. Too many made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure that African Americans had basic rights like voting. Law professor Grant M. Hayden suggests, and I quote, "The history of voting in the United States has not been characterized by smooth progress towards universal political participation. It has instead been made messier, littered with periods of both expansion and retraction of the franchise with respect to many groups of potential voters," end quote. In my estimation, this statement was just as relevant in 1820 as it is in 2020. To be sure, there are important signs of progress, like in Florida, where more than 1 million former felons will have their voting rights restored. However, there is still much work to be done as 24 states implemented new restrictions on voting, like the photo ID, exact match, use it or lose it laws, just to name a few. Many of us are aware of how former Secretary of State Brian Kemp of Georgia was able to purge almost 600,000 registered voters from the rolls in 2017. In 2018, during his bid for governor, he blocked 53,000 state residents from voting. Of that 53,000, 70% were African Americans. Unfortunately, court decisions that have diminished federal oversight in state elections have provided cover for those seeking to strip African Americans of their voting rights. Now, finally, standing in this place today, I have to acknowledge the more than 700,000 residents living in the District of Columbia, which I am one of, who still do not have a vote in Congress. So yes, Madam Mayor, we still have work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs-Thompson, for your powerful presentation on African Americans and the vote. Let's give her one more round of applause. Now, I'd like to welcome to the stage Charles Jean-Pierre, a teacher at Ludlow Taylor Elementary School, for an art presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start off with a quote by Jacob Lawrence, and it's going to tie into what our mayor just said. When the subject is strong, simplicity is the only way to treat it. And the mayor started out by saying every month is Black History Month. And so we've been working on these paintings since before the Christmas break. And these paintings are inspired by the artist Jacob Lawrence, African-American storyteller. He was born in New Jersey in 1917. And these students have been studying him for a while now, and this is the product. So we thank you for allowing us to be here. I want to mention their ELA teacher, and just our school as well, Ludlow Taylor Elementary School. We're a great school on Capitol Hill. But this project wasn't initially mine. It was their ELA teacher, Ms. Henderson, who's a DC native, who's been teaching there for over 15 years. She said, JP, we want to do something special. And so this project fell into our lap in being able to present this to you all. So DCPS is doing great things. We appreciate you for having us. I want to shout out Jacques Patterson. And Arvin, you're doing a great job. I'm gonna be sad to see you guys go in junior high school. Every 5 years, I cry at graduation. But this is a celebration. Thank you all. Take some time to look at the artwork. We have everything from the girls right here learning education in the north. People sleeping in the far left. The Great Migration series pretty much covers the story of African Americans from the south to the north. So they've been studying this, not just Arvin and not just Jacques, but the whole 5th grade class. You see here everything from funerals to jail cells, vagrancy laws, to moving, and right up here we have the train car. So we try to tie everything together and how Union Station played into that, right around the corner from us. So thank you very much, Charles Jean-Pierre. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Thank you, Chairman White.
Thank you so much, and I would suggest that you all take time after to really walk around and look at those artworks and experience what they have to offer. Now, for our last performance of the afternoon, please welcome the Kip College-Prep Choir.
broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, we gon' walk it out and move mountains. And I was like the day I was up, I was unafraid, I was up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I was up, high like the waves, I was up, in spite of the ache, I was up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. Silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet. Move mountains. And I was like the day I was up, I was unafraid, I was up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. All we need is hope, and for that we have each other, and for that we have each other. Yeah, we will rise, and we'll rise. Oh, we'll rise. I'll rise up, rise like the day I rise up. In spite of the ache, I'll rise 1,000 times again. And we'll rise up, high like the waves. We'll rise up, in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you.
Thank you, Kip, for that wonderful performance. Let's give them one more round of applause. Now, this has been a very incredible program, and it has been my pleasure to serve as your Master of Ceremony. I again want to thank our participants, Ms. Rita Jacobs, Thompson, Kip College-Prep, Ludlow Taylor Elementary, and Blacks and Wax. Let's give them all a hand. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you next year. Now, before you join us for a brief reception, I would like to extend an invite to Blacks on Wax performance March 20th at the Art and March 29th at the Kennedy Center. This year's theme is Vote, Your Choice, Your Life. Thank you.